Well, Oregon's offense struggled at times in the red zone a year ago, and Oregon's pitching staff struggled to throw strikes over the weekend. One thing's easier to fix than the other. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We will get to the disappointing series. Thrilling, exciting, amazing season by Oregon baseball comes to an end against Oral Roberts. Lots to talk about with regards to that later. But the red zone was an area offensively for Oregon where they really struggled at times a season ago. Now, it wasn't all bad. Kind of like the defense. The stats were not great, but weren't as terrible as it felt at times. So when I say to you, Oregon had some red zone struggles, which game do you think of? Probably Oregon State, right? Not able to punch it in at the end to take the lead for what could have been the game-winning touchdown. My mind personally, because that was one sequence, I go to Washington State, a game that Oregon should have lost but ended up winning. And we kept going down, and 4 red zone trips resulted in 3 field goals and a pick 6. Those are the sorts of sequences I look at and say, boy, Oregon maybe could improve in the red zone from what they did a season ago. And that's going to be one area where Will Stein can kind of one-up Kenny Dillingham of sorts. And look, he's a more experienced offensive coordinator and play caller now than Dillingham was when he took over. Doesn't automatically mean that he's going to be better than Dillingham in that sense. But I do think that it's possible, given that he's been in those spots a lot before. You know, Dillingham had obviously been an offensive coordinator, been on the headset, but he'd never been the actual play caller, and Stein has. So I think that he's got a greater feel for what he wants to do in the red zone, how he wants to execute down there, and I have some thoughts on what Oregon could be doing down there as well. And I'm always curious to your thoughts, so drop them in the YouTube comments or shoot me a note on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. That's also how you get in the mailbag, like my man Blazer Duck did. Blazer Duck is just the gold standard of question askers. That's just a fact. Spencer, Oregon had their struggles down in the red zone last year. 1. What would you like to see Oregon do differently with Will Stein to turn those struggles into touchdowns? 2, any certain plays you want to see the Ducks do more down in the red zone? So a season ago, just to be clear, Oregon's offense, this is not a bash Kenny Dillingham segment because he was really, really good. Oregon's offense could not really have been much better a season ago, except in the red zone. They were 64th in the country in red zone scoring percentage. That's touchdowns and field goals. Now, their touchdown percentage, in terms of how many times they score a touchdown versus how many total trips they had down there, was actually pretty good. It was about 70%. They scored 49 touchdowns on 70 trips to the red zone a season ago. The highest teams in the country, percentage-wise in that category, are in like the mid to upper 70s, but they don't really go above the mid 70s a whole heck of a lot when you're talking about the most productive offenses in the country. So Oregon was actually quite good in that sense, but 64th in red zone scoring percentage, not ideal. You're not going to get touchdowns 100% of the time in the red zone. I hope we all understand that, and I think we do, because in my experience hosting the show, Oregon fans, that be you, are all pretty well informed and understanding of how the game of football works. So I don't need to go into why that is. But what would I like to see Oregon do differently with Will Stein to turn those struggles into touchdowns? One thing is I don't want to see them get away from the 14J package. Now, whether or not they feel they have the personnel to kind of run it back with that formation, that's going to be up to Dan Lanning and company, because you use several tight ends at a time, right? Usually I think it was 3, and then you had an extra offensive lineman as well. I think that adds up because it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so those were the 5 players that were on the field in addition to the quarterback and the 5 offensive linemen. Running back, 3 tight ends, 1 offensive lineman. That was the 14J package a year ago. Now, they've added transfers at the tight end position, right? Casey Kelly coming from Ole Miss, and then Caden Ludwig, the Clackamas native, a town we'll be talking about later on today's show. He comes in as well as a preferred walk-on. And they have Kenyon Sadiq coming in as a true freshman. And you have T. Ferg and Patrick Herbert as your top 2. Now, if they feel good about putting together a 3 tight end package to pair with one of the extra offensive linemen, and there are a bunch of offensive linemen who could, serve that role. I mean, if your 2 starting tackles are Josh Connerly and Johnny Cornelius, George Silva was a 4-star transfer. You got Feope Lalaulu, who's played more snaps than a lot of people would think. Davey Uli's been on the field a time or two and has looked pretty good when he's out there. So I think they have plenty of offensive line bodies who could come in and do that. But I think one thing that I would like to see Oregon do out of that package is have more diverse passing plays. And I love that they were run-oriented because that's what you're doing, right? Like that, the whole reason that you are out there is you're putting out the big fellas. You're trying to line up, play smash-mouth football, enforce your will, and get into the end zone with a physical, downhill, one-cut running back like Jordan James, or I suspect Dante Dowdell as well. But, the passing plays they ran out of that last year in the red zone, they ran a couple against UCLA that were in the middle of the field that were 2-man routes. I would love to see what a 3-man route looks like out of that package. Because mostly when they got down inside the 10 and they called a passing play, it was a one option. Now, it worked several times, right? The touchdown to Josh Connerly against Colorado, the touchdown to Cam McCormick against Washington State. They should have called one of those plays against Oregon State down there at the end of the game. Lanning admitted as much afterwards, but that's what I would like to see them kind of introduce, because when you have that formation, right, the foundation is the same. The foundation is the same. Everyone knows you're going to be very run heavy there, but you can still introduce other wrinkles, right? Like I love the tight end sweep or the fullback dive, or another thing I would like to see out of that formation is not just, multiple passing options on a particular play, because I think there's some fun concepts you can do. I'm a big fan of play action boot and then a tight end throwback. So if you're, jumbo heavy to the right and you have an extra offensive lineman on the left side and you have 2 tight ends right, you go play action to the halfback. You roll you run the fullback into the flat. You have a tight end on a corner route, and then you have one tight end kind of delay and then release to the other side. I love those plays. I see a lot of other offenses running them, and I think that could be effective out of that formation if you put it in. So that's one thing. Another thing I'd like to see him do there is have 2 running back sets. And I think broadly speaking in the red zone, I think 2 running back sets are awesome, because if you have the right combination in there, it's sort of a variance of that 14J package. And you can bet that I'm going to tell you about that. You can also bet whatever you want over at FanDuel, because that's America's #1 sports book. And while the NBA Finals are still going on, you should make a fast break over to FanDuel, because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. They've got great promotions every day. Safe, secure, super easy to use app with a great interface. You get paid instantly. There's just no better place to bet all the action you want than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we've got our second segment sip. You could hear the dry mouth coming out during the live read, right? We might need to double up on the sip today, just to make sure that we don't have to have another interruption later in the show. But the reason I think that a 2-back look is interesting is, number one, when Oregon ran that a year ago, it was super effective. If you go back and look at all the running plays, Sean Dollars was in there a lot. Winnington was in. I mean, they'd mix and match the running backs and such, but I think you could call it like a hammer package almost. If you had Jordan James and Dante Dowdell in the backfield with Bo Nix. And one of the reasons I love that concept in the red zone is because in college football, you can't do this in the NFL. It's one of the reasons college is slightly easier formationally to, get some explosive running plays. Like, there are adjustments, of course, but you can't do this in the NFL for a reason. It's a benefit for the offense. And that's, you can leave an offensive lineman uncovered. So you can go trips to the wide side. You can go tight end strong to the right and put 2 running backs in the backfield. And you don't have to cover up your left tackle. And Oregon did that out of that formation with the 2 running backs next to Bo Nix quite a bit a season ago. And I think the idea of, loading up the defense to, the strong side of the field, but then running to the weak side and having either Jordan James or Dowdell or Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving's a good blocker, by the way. Have Bucky Irving be a lead blocker, or Noah Whittington, or whoever. Have one guy block for another. I think that in the red zone can work, because even more so than when you're in the middle of the field, red zone is a numbers game, and it can be really, really tricky to get advantageous situations down there because everything is so condensed, right? So safeties are playing up closer to the line of scrimmage. You might have more guys just in the box than you would if you were to line up in the same formation at, say, your own 40-yard line. So I've always thought that that'd be an interesting concept to introduce in there, and I felt that a year ago, Oregon had some really, really good red zone plays, like the Troy Franklin touchdown against UCLA. It's a great play. They went back to it against Oregon State. Beavs were ready for it. Give them credit. They'd watched film and done their homework, and they were prepared for that particular look. But I think utilizing motion, utilizing rub routes as well for passing concepts is a great idea, and I would very much appreciate if Will Stein would not get so locked in to running halfback wheel, which can be a great concept, by the way. Everybody runs it. But that Washington State game, I've got like PTSD on Kenny Dillingham really wanting halfback wheel to work in the red zone. And he ran it on a 4th down, and we barely made it. And then they tried the same play again, and it was a pick 6. And then he went back to the halfback wheel later out of a little bit of a different look, and it was a touchdown. And I get that it worked, but I think he needed to have a little bit of a deeper bag in that sense. Not saying that concept can't be there, but there are more ways to get the ball to the running back. Heck, one play that I forget who ran it. I forget who ran it in college, but the concept, I first saw the Carolina Panthers do it years ago with Christian McCaffrey. It's that famous kind of clip of Cam Newton talking to, I think it's Clay Matthews of the Packers on the other side. They come out in a certain formation. They're inside the 10 or 15-yard line, and Clay Matthews says, "It's a wheel route. It's a wheel route." And Cam Newton says, "You've been watching film, huh? That's cool. Watch this." And then McCaffrey comes out of the backfield, and it's an all verticals concept basically to clear everybody out and create depth. And then he runs an angle route, or what they call a Texas route, out of the backfield, and he's the primary option on that play. I would love to see that sort of stuff. And Oregon actually did run that, not in the red zone specifically, but just outside of it, or in opponent's territory at least, in the Cal game. And it worked really well. And then we never went back to it. And I never quite understood why. I know that I'm not an offensive coordinator, and it's really, really complicated and whatnot, but that is something that I think can work. And I think we have the personnel to do that as well. You have guys like Terrence Ferguson and Troy Franklin who draw a lot of attention, and when they run up the field, the defense is going to go and jump over to cover them, and that can leave opportunities for guys like Whittington or Irving or James or Dowdell out of the backfield for stuff like that. So those would be a few of the things I'd like to see, but I am curious as to what Stein, comes up with. How does he use motion? How does he use 2 backs? Does he put, two running backs in the game when they're under center? Does he only do it when they're in shotgun? I don't know. But those are a few of the things that I would like to see. Okay, I think I answered that question sufficiently. Let's get to the... Gosh, it was a bummer. Okay, first of all, Oregon baseball just had an awesome season. Do not let the disappointment of not getting to the College World Series for the first time since 1954 overshadow the fact that this is a very real program, a very successful program. They have lost great players, right? Spencer Steer, by the way, who was a Duck of the past, was like the NL Rookie of the Month. There are Oregon baseball players littered around the professional league, and they continue to reload every year. Now, this was a little bit of a bummer for sure, maybe a lot of bit of a bummer, because you had so much hitting talent on this team. Sabine Ceballos. I mean, like Riku Nishida, Tanner Smith. You go up and down that lineup, and you go, man, they got bats. They got killers. They got dudes that can absolutely rake. Bennett Thompson, I got to shout out Bennett Thompson here. My brother was a catcher in high school. He was really, really good, and he always appreciates great catching play. Bennett Thompson swings a great bat. Bennett Thompson is an absolute brick wall backstop for Oregon pitching, which had a rough final game, unfortunately, which I'll get to in a moment. But that guy deserves all the credit in the world for the way he played. He had this phenomenal play that my brother wasn't watching at the time, and I texted him, like, dude, you're going to love this play, because he geeks out on catching stuff the way I geek out on pretty much everything. Thompson blocks the ball. I think it was in the first, it was in one of, I think it might have been in game 2 against Oral Roberts on Saturday. Catcher blocks the ball, Bennett Thompson does, and it was like a spiked curveball, and he had to stand up to block it. He then was able to perfectly use his chest protector to keep the ball in front. He identifies that the runner is going, who had some speed, and he didn't panic, and he picked up, he threw a laser down to second, hosed the guy out. That is a big-time catcher play, and I love seeing that stuff. And look, credit to the guys who played hard the entire series, right? There's not going to be, there should not be any sentiment from anyone anywhere of, you know, what Dana Altman felt after, not this past season, but the previous season, where he said, you know, I didn't have to run guys out of the gym. We got to, you know, get our culture right and all that sort of stuff. None of that here. These guys played their butts off. They are the only team in college baseball super regional history to trail by 8 or more runs and win the game. And that game 1 was absolutely thrilling. It is one of the most exciting Oregon things I've seen in a long time, because they went up 8-0. I was out with some friends in Oregon, and I was not able to watch at that time, and so I was following along, and I was like, oh, okay, 8-2, all right, 8-5, oh, 8-6, and then I was back home, and I was able to watch the game, and it was awesome. It was absolutely, positively awesome. And I do not believe, though this was a disappointing end to an amazing season for the Ducks, I do not believe it was a total loss. But it was a frustrating way to go out. I will get to that, but I think this is the most important thing for Oregon fans to understand, and this is how I was thinking about it. We're going to set this up with another sip so I can, you know, really go on a tirade here. That Oregon baseball team reminded me very, very much of the 2009 and 2010 Oregon football teams. 100%, and this is why. In the years leading up to those 2 seasons in which Oregon lost the Rose Bowl and lost the national championship game, the excitement and the interest in the program took off exponentially. It was already high. It was already in a good place. Mike Bellotti was there. We were winning games. We'd won the Holiday Bowl. We won the Sun Bowl. We'd, you know, been in the national championship discussion with Dennis Dixon, of course, and then that tragedy took place. But when 2009 and 2010 happened, that was a moment for Oregon football. And this past weekend was a moment for Oregon baseball. No, they did not achieve what their ultimate goal is right now, which is to get to the College World Series, which they haven't done in the modern era since the program restarted, thanks to Pat Kilkenny in 2007. But they were right there. And they have proven each of the last several years that they can lose talented players, they can bring new ones in, they can reload, and they can win at a high level. And they won the Pac-12 tournament this year, and that's no small thing. The Pac-12 is a really good baseball conference. We all know what Oregon State has done on the baseball field over the years. Stanford's really good. Arizona's been good. ASU was in a regional. They're a bit. UCLA's been good, I think, over the last several years. There are a lot of really, really good baseball teams. Washington was playing in a regional this year as well. It's a great baseball conference, and Oregon has proven themselves to be capable of playing with the best in the league. And they proved themselves over the weekend capable of getting to the College World Series. They didn't get there, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. And the way that it took place, and all of you thousands of fans who made it 3 consecutive sellouts over the weekend at PK Park, absolutely contributed to all of this and what I'm talking about here. The spectacle of turning on an Oregon baseball game and feeling that energy and seeing that passion. And now we're at the point where we as Oregon fans were invested, and we felt a legitimate letdown there. I think it's in a similar kind of, stratosphere support-wise from fans as basketball, to where you'll get some loose following over the regular season. Not as closely in baseball because there are more games. I totally understand that. But once the postseason starts, we're dialed in. And there are plenty of people who are like that with basketball for college hoops. And I totally get that. You don't watch as much during the regular season. You maybe catch a game here and there, and then the postseason starts, and if you're around and you got teams wearing the Oregon uniform, you're going to be dialed. And that's totally fine, because that's a lot of what college sports are. Not everybody is a diehard like me. Some people are more casual with their fandom, whether it's from Oregon or a different school, and that's okay. But you got to show up when it counts, and that was the first time in 11 years that Oregon had hosted a super regional. And the environment, the atmosphere, the games could not have gone better. Except Oregon could have won either game 2 or 3. Now, game 3 felt bad going into it. And so the unfortunate part of all of this is that this is a situation that's marred by poor pitching, but it's really a situation marred by injuries, because that's why the pitching was poor. Oregon as a team for the last several years since Mark Wasikowski took over, they have been able to swing the bats over and over and over again. They're putting hitters in the pros. They're going to put more guys there. Drew Cowley and Sabine Ceballos, these guys are absolute sluggers. Jared Walsh at first base as well. They've got a bunch of good bats. And they keep finding guys like Riku Nishida or Walsh or Ceballos. Tanner Smith ends his career as one of the most decorated Oregon baseball players ever. And he was awesome, had the home run in the first inning yesterday, that being Sunday. The ability for a program to do that and have a clear identity is good. But for Oregon to take the next step, there has to be more pitching. Now, the disappointing thing is I thought the pitching this year had improved from what it was a year ago. But Oregon, it's amazing they got to this point, and a testament to how great the offense truly was, that they did all of this. Won a Nashville regional with number 6 Vanderbilt. They didn't lose a game over there. They did that without Jay Stoffel, who was their best pitcher all season long. And unfortunately, he ended up getting hurt. And they didn't have Jay Stoffel, and they didn't have Isaac Aon, and they didn't have Matthew Grabman, and they really could have used them. They really could have used them. Jackson Pace battled as well as he could on Sunday in Game 3, but the moment where Oregon needed to capture it was Game 2, and the chips didn't fall that way. It sucked. It stunk. It was frustrating. It is frustrating because if Oregon's pitching staff is healthy, they're probably able to win that series. But still, they were right there. And that's why I compare it to those 2009 and 2010 Oregon football teams. If you just look at the end result, you're not going to get an accurate depiction of what took place and how good those teams actually were. If you just say Oregon lost to Auburn, that doesn't tell the story of that game. They were outsized. They were out-athleted at most positions on the field, and it came down to a fluke play and a game-winning field goal. And you might say, wow, Oral Roberts was able to put up all these runs, do all that sort of stuff. They were missing some of their best pitch. They were missing their best pitcher and other key arms, and that showed in Game 3. And they were 2 outs away. They were 2 outs away from going to Omaha. And Mark Wasikowski has this program in a great place. I will continue. If you want to send me baseball questions, by all means. I will answer them to the best of my ability. I won't pretend that I know, the entire roster inside and out, 2 and 3 deep the way I do for football. But I was watching this entire run. I was having fun. I love college baseball. I love college sports in general. Heck, I was watching the softball team as well. They got to a super regional, and they ran into a buzzsaw in Oklahoma State. But they had a really, really good year. And for both teams to get out of a road regional this year is outstanding. And Melissa Lombardi deserves a lot of credit. And Mark Wasikowski deserves a lot of credit. And look, in that final game, it was frustrating because it was self-inflicted wounds. The final score was 11-6, if you missed it. It was 5-4 going into the 7th inning after a bottom of the 6th solo shot from Sabine Ceballos. In the 7th and 9th innings combined, Oral Roberts put up 6 runs. They had 1 hit. Oregon was already thin at pitching, which had improved but can still be better, and we ran out of it. We had injuries, we ran out of pitching, and we literally could not throw a strike. And it was frustrating to watch. It was frustrating as hell. And you know what? It was frustrating for those guys on the mound as well, because they wanted to throw strikes. They wanted to win. They wanted to go to Omaha too. But errors and walks, it's a frustrating way to end what, again, I feel the need to reiterate, was an outstanding season. And though it didn't have the end result we were hoping for, I feel really, really good about where that program is at. I love seeing fans show up to PK Park. I absolutely love it. And I hope it continues to grow and thrive. All right, that's enough baseball talk. A couple things to wrap up today's show. Oregon got a new commitment in the 2024 class. We'll talk about it more with Brian Smith later this week, but his name is Devin Brooks, in-state kid from Clackamas High School. Remember I mentioned Clackamas earlier? Boom, there you go. 6'4", 280 pounds. Offensive tackle is kind of his body type there. And, we'll go more in detail with Brian later this week. That'll be Thursday's show. So like and subscribe if you have not already. But I like getting those sorts of kids in state. Sign of a healthy program is that the best kids within your state want to go to your school. So nice little pickup there for the Ducks. Continue, and that's 2024. That's not 2025 like we were talking about last week on the show. That's 2024. So name to watch there, and we'll get more into that later this week. Finally, a fun question here to wrap up the show. Need a third segment sip. Goodness. This is from Beginner Catholic. This is not duck related, but I like it anyway. Because, as I always say, YouTube comments, Twitter, at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks, this is an open line of communication. You ask me a question on, I don't do religion, I don't do politics. Other than that, by all means, fire away. I'm an open book. He asks, if you could construct your ideal front 9 using courses you've played, what would it be? I thought long and hard about how to answer this question. I am an avid golfer, as many of you know. If you are an avid golfer out there, you might enjoy this. If you are not an avid golfer, you might have turned off the show already, and that's okay, because this is just kind of a fun question to answer. But I went through my mental database and thought about what are my favorite holes that I've played of this variety. So first of all, for 9 holes, 18 would have taken a while, but I could have done it. For 9 holes, 3 par 3s, 3 par 4s, and 3 par 5s. I love those 9 holes, mostly because I always play par 5s really, really well. That's kind of how I score. That's how anyway. So start with the par 3s. And these are all of courses that I have played. The first par 3 would be one of the most iconic ones in the world, the 7th hole at Pebble Beach. I would put in the 15th hole at Sand Hollow. That's probably the most famous course down here in Utah, and it's dug out of the side of a cliff. It's awesome. And I would put the 11th at Seattle Golf Club, which is just one of the most aesthetically beautiful things to look at, going over water with beautiful flower beds in the background I have ever seen. So those would be the par 3s. The par 4s, I'm going with the 10th at Copper Rock, which is also a course down here in Utah. The 16th at Bandon Dunes, the iconic 16th at Bandon Dunes. Shout out to Oregon. And another one down here in Utah that I love, the 15th at the Ledges of St. George. It's the segmented par 4. You can drive the green if you want to take a risk, or you can lay up and just hit an iron and then have a wedge in. It's a beautiful, beautiful hole. It's got this great backdrop as well. Those would be my par 4s. And then my par 5s, 2 in the state of Oregon here. The 15th hole at Oregon Golf Club, which is where I was a member at in high school, out in West Lynn. And that was always my favorite hole probably my favorite hole out there, except for maybe 7, the par 4, which I almost put in here, but didn't quite crack the list. I would put the 18th at Waverly. I loved Waverly Country Club. I had the good fortune of taking lessons out there. Got to play that hole all the time. Love that course. And that hole is amazing. And then I would end it with the 18th hole at Pebble Beach. Not a bad list. I am most fortunate to have been able to play all those places. I love the question. As always, keep them coming. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Back tomorrow. And until then, go Ducks.